The first frost had turned Maple Street into a glistening labyrinth of ice. I was out in the driveway, hooded jacket zipped tight, the snow blower growling against the drifts, when a voice cut through the morning silence. "You have to let me use that," Karen said, her breath forming angry clouds. "It's for the neighborhood. Community safety." Her eyes were sharp behind thick glasses, her tone equal parts pleading and accusing. I paused mid-scoop, snow spraying like frozen confetti. Normally, I'd nod and let a neighbor borrow a tool. But there was something off, a calculated urgency in her step, as if she wanted more than just to clear snow. "I'll think about it," I said cautiously, wiping my gloves. She stepped closer, boots crunching on ice. "No, you don't get to think. This is for everyone. Just hand it over." It wasn't just snow. It was control. The silence that followed was thick, punctuated by the snowblower's low hum. Karen's hand hovered over the machine, not touching it, but ready. My instinct screamed, "There's more to this than community safety." She left briefly to make a call, muttering about rules and neighbors' responsibilities. The driveway felt suddenly too small, the street too quiet. I imagined her standing in front of every neighbor, petition in hand, trying to make everyone see her as the arbiter of frost. I leaned against the garage, the morning sun bouncing off the ice. The neighborhood seemed serene, innocent, but even the soft crunch of a passing tire felt like a threat now. Karen's intrusion wasn't just physical. She had claimed moral authority over something that was mine. By noon, the snow blower sat untouched. I poured myself coffee, but the warmth didn't reach my hands. Every shadow felt longer, every creak of the siding suspicious. I considered my options, weighing neighborly diplomacy against something firmer. By evening, a plan had crystallized in my mind. If she wanted the machine, she'd earn it. Not through confrontation, not through shouting, but through patience, through acknowledgement of boundaries she clearly ignored. And maybe, just maybe, I could make her regret the overreach without ever touching her. The wind picked up, carrying the echo of her earlier threats. Maple Street, so calm on the surface, was already trembling under the frost of quiet war. I spent the next day observing. Karen's patterns were predictable. The morning coffee at the corner store, the phone calls, the fleeting glances at my driveway. Every gesture revealed more than politeness, it was strategy, a psychological probe testing limits. I checked the snow blower, functional, fuel-topped, ready. My journal recorded each interaction with Karen, her exact words, tone, and timing. Even small details mattered. Which neighbor had she convinced to side with her? Who was silently amused, waiting for the inevitable escalation? The neighborhood started to feel like a chessboard. Every morning, the frost sparkled differently, shadows forming corridors for subtle threats. I noticed her leaving notes under doors, requests, warnings, demands. One even cited city ordinances, loosely quoted, implying surveillance. I began crafting small, invisible traps. The driveway seemed wider, emptier than normal. I wore headphones and pretended oblivion while noting her reactions from the kitchen window. She lingered longer than necessary near the snow blower, tapping the handle, sighing with the weight of imagined entitlement. I even left a minor hazard, a thin layer of ice that was obvious enough to notice, but tricky enough to make her cautious. She slipped slightly, caught herself, then smiled with the thrill of defiance. Each misstep added evidence, proof of her disregard and inflated confidence. By night, I realized Karen wasn't just a snowblower enthusiast. She thrived on the idea of control, of bending neighbors' behavior without consequence. And yet, she underestimated me. I documented everything, her attempts to charm, her threats disguised as civic concern, her phone calls to city committees. I had a dossier, carefully curated, slowly building a narrative that could survive public scrutiny. The air grew colder. Frost traced the edges of windows like ink. Maple Street's calm was a fragile veil. Karen's campaign was widening, but I had insight she didn't, timing, patience, and the quiet art of leverage. Tomorrow, she would ask again. I would be ready. The next morning, the neighborhood association meeting was packed. The hall smelled faintly of coffee and recycled paper, but tension hung heavier than the winter air. Karen arrived early, hair perfectly coiffed, binder in hand, eyes scanning every corner as if claiming the room before speaking. I entered quietly, choosing a seat near the back. The snowblower had been parked in my driveway, visible through the window, a silent, gleaming trophy. Karen's eyes flicked toward it, almost imperceptibly, then returned to the crowd. She thrived in public scrutiny, in making her case as if the frost itself endorsed her. "Neighbors," she began, voice firm, projecting civility. "Winter safety is non-negotiable. Access to essential equipment, like snowblowers, is a community responsibility." Her binder thumped against the podium, the sound sharp, calculated. "We need fairness, cooperation, accountability." Murmurs rippled. Some nodded. Some frowned. She had rehearsed this, polished her moral high ground until it gleamed. But I was ready. I rose slowly, holding a folder of my own. The room quieted. "I think you'll want to hear this," I said, voice calm but carrying across the hall. I passed the folder to the head of the association. Inside were notes, photos, and logs, her repeated demands, manipulations, and the minor hazard she ignored on my property. The murmur became a ripple of shock. Karen's confident mask faltered. She tried to interject, but I had anticipated every word, every excuse, every carefully phrased demand. "I offered her the snow blower," I said evenly, locking eyes with her. She refused a simple acknowledgement of boundaries. Instead, she pushed, threatened, and manipulated. The community didn't deserve this. Her face flushed, lips trembling, the calm veneer cracking. She tried to argue, but the evidence spoke louder than any performance. Phones lifted to record, neighbors leaning forward, some whispering, others openly shaking their heads. Then came the twist. From my coat pocket, I produced a small, digital recorder. I pressed play. Karen's voice, unguarded, full of frustration and entitlement, filled the hall. "He's ridiculous. Why won't he just give it to me?" The recording was crisp, undeniable. The room fell silent. Karen's shoulders slumped, eyes darting. The public exposure was complete. No binder, no polished speech, no moral argument could salvage her control. A final, deliberate pause. "We all live here," I said softly, almost kindly. "Cooperation requires respect. That's what community means." Some applauded, some simply stared. Karen turned, storming toward the exit, binder abandoned, dignity unraveling like frost melting under the weak winter sun. Outside, the snow blower gleamed, untouched, a symbol not just of my property, but of quiet strategy, patience, and leverage. She had lost in front of everyone, yet I knew better than to believe the story was over. The wind whipped against the windows, carrying whispers of winter and threat. Maple Street had witnessed justice, but the frost had deepened, hiding the next move, the next intrusion. I watched Karen retreat, coat flaring, boots crunching in the snow. The neighborhood breathed again, but beneath the relief lingered the hint, the frost could shift and a bigger challenge might already be waiting. Maple Street felt lighter the morning after the meeting, but the frost still lingered, stubborn and crystalline. Snow drifted lazily against the sidewalks, and the air smelled of winter's brittle clarity. Neighbors emerged, cautious smiles, polite nods, curious glances at the driveway where the snowblower sat like a quiet sentinel. Some offered congratulations. "You really stood your ground," a neighbor whispered, handing me a thermos of coffee. I nodded, sipping slowly, savoring the warmth against the cold. There was satisfaction in order restored, in boundaries respected. But there was also awareness. Confrontation ended, but vigilance remained. Karen had not returned. Rumor spread quickly. She'd made apologies under whispered pressure, some even in writing. The notes she left, the emails she sent, were curt, begrudging, and carefully worded. I read each one, noting the subtle admissions and the forced civility. Every word was a victory of patience and strategy over entitlement. The neighborhood returned to rhythm. Children skated on the small frozen pond, mail carriers trudged through drifts, and neighbors shoveled together, the snowblower humming steadily as if nothing had happened. Yet I noticed how glances lingered, how conversations dipped into hushed speculation. Maple Street's surface calm was intact, but underneath, the frost had layered itself into memory, proof that tensions could flare at any moment. I returned to my driveway one evening, snow blower idling, careful and deliberate. The frost glimmered against the fading sun, each flake sharp, precise, reflective of the day's events. I allowed a small smile. Justice had been subtle, unspoken, undeniable. But the victory was quiet, not triumphant. From the corner of my eye, a shadow shifted near the street lamp. A figure paused, just beyond visibility, watching the house. The wind carried a faint rustle, a hint of movement too deliberate to be casual. Someone else had taken note, perhaps learning from Karen's overreach, perhaps plotting a subtler intrusion. I felt the same tingle I had on the first morning of frost, the awareness that control was always temporary. I closed the garage, the snow blower humming softly inside, and watched the street through the frost-covered window. The neighborhood continued its routines, but I remained alert. The subtle shifts in behavior, the cautious glances, the minor adjustments in walking paths, they were signs of a community now aware of boundaries, of consequences. The frost had marked more than the streets, it had marked awareness, vigilance, and the quiet power of patience. That night, snow fell heavier. I stepped outside briefly, the cold biting, listening. Somewhere in the shadows, movement, too careful, too deliberate, passed beyond the reach of streetlights. A whisper of threat remained, subtle, almost playful, reminding me that even victories are temporary, and some challenges never truly disappear. Maple Street slept under frost and quiet watchfulness. And somewhere, just beyond perception, another figure lingered, waiting for a moment to test the calm. The snow blower stood idle. I smiled, letting the frost whisper its cold reminder. The war was never truly over. If you want, I can also create a visual cinematic shot list for each chapter. So this story could be storyboard for an actual thriller scene by scene, highlighting angles, lighting, and suspense beats. It would elevate it from script to nearly cinematic production-ready material.